So Moses has been with Israel for longer than 34 years as their leader. Does 34 years ring a bell? He's been their leader. They have trusted him. They have followed him. He has led them faithfully. He met them when they were in the wilderness, or in Egypt, I mean, when they were slaves there under fierce oppression, if you can imagine. Put upon to do work, to build pyramids and sphinxes and other temples and buildings that were needed with the sweat of their brow, building at some point all of the bricks that they needed in order to do the work, but still being required to get a certain amount of stuff done during the day. And in the sweat of their brow and in their anguish, they cried out to God. And God heard their cry and came down. And came down. He came down in the person of Moses. He won Moses for the task and brought Moses to them. And Moses stood before Pharaoh and he said, "Let my people go." And a fierce negotiation took place with lots of strange things happening, but it was clearly the power of God making clear to Egypt that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was stronger than any of their gods, because he beat each one after another, until he conquered the sun god, the oldest son of the Pharaoh in Egypt. And then the Pharaoh said, "Go," and Moses and the crowd went. And they came to the banks of the Red Sea, and the water lapped at their feet, and the Egyptians came from behind them, and they were afraid, and they cried out again to God. And Moses stretched forth his rod, and the waters parted, and Israel went through on dry land, another remarkable miracle at the hand of the God who came down to save them. And they walked across that seabed on dry land and came to the other side. And Moses stretched forth his hand again, and the water fell on Egypt, and their enemies were crushed that day, and Israel was free. And they sang on the water banks, "Shibru li Yahweh, ki gago o ga'a suswaro korbo." Sing to the Lord. The horse and the rider he has thrown into the sea. It's an incredible moment. And I'd like to say at this point, Israel is so clear on the power and wonder of God that they never doubt God again. But you know it's not true. Within weeks or months, they are already complaining. They've got a very selective memory of what took place in Egypt. They're remembering those golden days, kind of like we do about the 50s and 60s, or probably not the 60s, but certainly the 50s. Those were the golden days. But they weren't. But that's all they can remember. They can remember the leeks and the garlics and all the incredible things they ate. Sounds like a bunch of Americans, doesn't it? We're all taken up with the food. Love that food. Did you go to Lebec Finn when it was here? That was food. Oh, sorry, I went to McDonald's for lunch today. Not quite the same. But they were complaining. They were complaining. And God heard their complaint. And he fed them as they walked into the wilderness to head toward the promised land. And he promised a land flowing with milk and honey to them if they would follow him on the way. But they would not. They complained. They forgot their God. They forgot the power that they had seen. They saw only the things that scared them. And they looked for something tangible that could save them. And yet their God provided day by day the bread that they needed to eat. Every morning, bread to eat, water to drink, occasionally, when they were complaining a great deal about the food, quail to eat. But they ate so much quail on that occasion that it began to come out of their noses. You know how we are on Thanksgiving. During that time, Moses went up the mountain. He went up the mountain to commune with God, and the people looked around for Moses, and they couldn't find him anywhere. So they thought that there was no Moses anymore, out of sight, out of mind. So therefore there must not be any God anymore. And so they began to dance and to party and to make for themselves other gods to follow. But then Moses comes back and disciplines them and continues to feed them and continues to clothe them. They send spies into the promised land, 10 of them, to scout out the land, to see what it looks like, to see whether it is indeed a land flowing with milk and honey. And 8 come back and they say, it's a fearful land. There are giants there. How will we be able to stand against them? They're dangerous people. They're dangerous circumstances. We have no hope. But Joshua and Caleb said, God will give us the victory because it is indeed a land flowing with milk and honey. So too remembered the power of God to transform and heal. 2. And Israel voted with the 8. How democratic. And God said, this generation will never enter the promised land, because they have not trusted the Lord their God. You can get some sense of how much God likes complaint, can't you? By the fact that a whole generation of people spend 38 years in the wilderness. Today's lesson takes place at the end of that time. Moses is now on the mountain with Israel, looking out over the promised land. The people of Israel are arrayed around the mountain, listening to him give his final words. He's not going in, because on one occasion he was disobedient. One occasion. But you see, God judges his leaders more fiercely when they're unfaithful, because they do so much harm to the people of God. Moses says to them, choose this day whom you will serve. So let me try this on you. Pretty easy choices here. I think you'll have no trouble. So first question, life or death? Life or death? Life, okay. Adversity or abundance? Adversity or abundance? Blessing or curse? Have you had any trouble with these yet? Pretty easy. So what's the condition? What's the condition? If you love the Lord your God with all of your heart. If you love the Lord your God with all of your heart. That's pretty easy too, don't you think? Israel demonstrated how easy it was. Not. I read a book by a writer for the New York Times, whose name I've forgotten. I've even forgotten the title. I was trying to remember it coming in. The premise of the book is, it takes 10,000 hours to master something. You know the book I'm referring to, some of you. What is it?
I think it's mindset.
Is it? Blink. Blink, yeah. Blink. So, 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours. So that doesn't give me a lot of time in a lifetime to do a whole lot of other things. If I'm going to master what I've been given, it's going to take me 10,000 hours. So Jesus says, you can't serve two masters. Either you're going to love the one and hate the other, or you're going to hate one and love the other. He's making the same point. So what are you going to spend your time loving? If you only have a finite amount of time, what is the most valuable thing to love in order for joy and abundance to come? I propose that if we love God, here's what Matthew, or Jesus says in the Gospel of Matthew, seek first the kingdom of God, and all these other things will be added to you. All these other things. So that if we love God, then intimate relationship can happen with other people because we learn how to love, to forgive, to be in relationship when we are in the presence of God. 10,000 hours learning to love Him. If we love God, then the particular skill or gift, the particular passion that I've been given will be empowered to do something that redeems the world when it is under the lordship of Jesus Christ. If in everything He has preeminence, then all the other stuff happens as well. I've just finished a book called The Perfect Mile. See, I can't actually remember the names of books. The Perfect Mile, which is about, well, it's for the sake of this sermon, it's about Roger Bannister, the first man to run a sub 4-minute mile. Roger Bannister is a medical student, also a very gifted runner, a British runner. He devotes his medical study to the study of running and then runs himself. He does all of the running that's necessary, but has other things that he does as well. So I think he's really a perfect example of what I'm saying. Because he lives the rest of his life, he does a lot of really valuable things, but he focuses on his running, but only for about 4 years of his life, maybe 7 years of his life. 7 years. But boy, does he devote his life to it. He runs tests on himself, running himself until he is exhausted, plugging into all kinds of things while he runs on the treadmill so that he can measure what happens to someone who runs to exhaustion. And then he gets all of his friends to come in and he hooks them all up to these tubes and things, and they run until they're exhausted. What a great friend he is, don't you think? And then he starts running and runs, and he runs the first few times he can just get down to 4.6, and then finally he breaks through and he runs a 59.6 mile, and he will only run 2 more times in his life, and the rest of his life he will devote to neurology. I was told by a neurologist after the first service that he actually wrote one of the classic textbooks on neurology. Didn't know that, even after reading the book. So here's a man who demonstrated single focus, the sort of single focus that's required if we're going to devote ourselves to God. So the choice is, well, there are only 2 things that we're commanded to do, really, aren't there? What are they? Love the Lord your God with all of your heart and mind and soul, and actually one place says, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. How hard is that? Well, yes, not very easy. It's impossible unless we've understood the first part, which is, choose this day whom you'll serve. Choose this day whom you'll serve. God or gods? Will you make something else your God? Will you allow your fear of the circumstances in which you find yourself to pull your eyes away from God and to look for someone else to save you? I love this old joke about the man who's clinging to a bush on the edge of a cliff. He's halfway down and he's holding on like this, and he yells to God for help, and God says, "Let go of the branch." And the man thinks for a while and he says, "Is there anyone else up there?" That's what happens so much when we are afraid. We look for something else when indeed the only salvation for us is the one whom we have chosen to serve. And I would propose to you that we must choose this God over and over again. Once is not enough. When we find ourselves in new circumstances that confuse or scare us, we must again say, "I choose you, God. I choose life with you. I choose abundance with you, because I know that it is the only place that I can find it." The only place. So, St. Matthew's, guess what? Our leader of 34 years has gone. And he's given you the same choice. Choose this day whom you will serve. God or other men or women, and if we choose God and we devote 10,000 hours or more to mastering our love relationship with Him, then we will also discover that God has given each of us a mission to do here, work to do at St. Matthew's in this time of wilderness, when we're waiting for the Joshua, whatever the female version of Joshua is, while we're waiting for that to take place. This is the time when we each recover and discover perhaps what it is God is calling us to do and be, so that we might use the skills and gifts we've been given to do the work that must be done here, even after the new Joshua comes. Choose this day, St. Matthew's. God or gods? God or gods? Abundance or adversity? You get that if you choose God. Not necessarily financial, but abundance of life. Blessing or curse? Now in the name of the Father and Son and Holy Spirit.